Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the heart of a city built on water. A place where people didn't just farm the land, they farmed the lake. Picture this: soft mist rising over a still, moonlit surface, the occasional splash of a fish. A raft glides by, piled high with greens and herbs, its pilot humming something low and ancient. You're drifting, not sure if you're dreaming or just deeply overdue for sleep. It's the middle of the night, but the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and crushed mint. Somewhere nearby, a frog makes a surprisingly aggressive noise. Rude, really. But you're too drowsy to care. Your raft bumps gently against something soft. Is it another boat? A plant? A garden? Oh, right. You're on a lake. And that garden? It's floating. Kind of. Sort of. Not really. We'll get to that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Night owls, insomniacs, and history nerds, I see you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The water's surface shimmers like black glass, reflecting only fragments of the stars above. You're not walking, you're not even really boating, you're floating. Everything here floats. Sort of. Welcome to the Valley of Mexico, somewhere around the year 1450. You're on Lake Xochimilco, and no, don't try to pronounce that before caffeine. Imagine living in a place where the land is so limited, so squishy, so wet, that people had to invent a brand new way to grow their food. And they did, by building artificial islands that acted like farms floating near the edges of the lake. Except here's the twist: they didn't really float. They were anchored to the lake bed, which makes them... what? Submerged gardens, soggy fields, farm boats? We'll go with chinampas. You're on one right now. It's a long, rectangular patch of land surrounded by a thin canal. Crops grow in neat rows: maize, beans, squash, all of them thriving. Even at night, the plants seem impossibly green, their leaves catching slivers of starlight. The air hums with quiet life. Dragonflies flit, owls blink, and a sleeping farmer somewhere lets out a snore that could rattle corn. The Aztecs, or more accurately, the Mexica people, didn't invent chinampas, but wow, did they perfect them. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions came from earlier cultures like the Xochimilca. Some say chinampa farming started as early as 1000 CE. Others insist it was a Mexica innovation during their empire-building heyday. Either way, it's brilliant. These artificial islands were made by layering mud, lake, sediment, and decaying vegetation in rectangular forms, reinforced with woven reeds and anchored by tree roots. The result? Super fertile farmland in a place that should have been completely unfarmable. And here's the kicker. This system could grow 7 crops a year. That's right, 7. Your modern houseplant is crying in shame right now. Let's pause for a sensory check. Beneath your feet, the earth is springy, moist. It smells of clay, algae, and the faint musk of decayed leaves. You kneel, scoop a handful, and feel how rich it is. It squishes just right, like a well-cooked risotto. And somehow you're not grossed out. Somewhere in the distance, a torch flickers on a wooden post. You can just make out the silhouette of a canoe. It moves silently across the dark water, steered by a farmer going to check his crops. Yes, even at night. That's how intense these farmers were. Oh, and just a fun fringe fact. Some chinampa builders used human waste, yes, poop, as fertilizer. It was called night soil, and they collected it carefully like gold. So, sweet dreams. You walk the narrow path along the edge of the island, and every few steps, a low splash echoes from the canal beside you. Fish swim here too, and farmers often harvested both vegetables and dinner from the same spot. Efficient, if not exactly appetizing. There are willow trees at the corners of the chinampa. Their roots help anchor the soil and prevent erosion, and their drooping branches sway gently in the night breeze. Some whisper that these trees were also planted for spiritual protection. Guardians of the land, tall and silent. You crouch and examine a stalk of maize. It's thriving, of course. These gardens are self-irrigating. The canal water seeps through the chinampa's porous edges, keeping everything hydrated. No sprinklers, no hoses, just centuries of knowledge and one very obedient lake. Back in the city, Tenochtitlan to be exact, people are asleep in their stone homes laid out in careful grids along canals. Think of it as Venice if Venice had way more corn and way fewer gondolas. But out here on the edge of the lake, life keeps going. Quietly. Persistently. Crops don't sleep, and neither do the farmers. In fact, the term floating garden might be one of history's most misleading labels. Chinampas are more like raised beds on steroids. Massive, stable, and so productive they fed an empire. Imagine New York City being fed entirely by urban rooftop gardens. And now imagine those gardens are on canoes surrounded by ducks. You yawn. The scent of wet earth is oddly comforting now. You lie down on a raised patch of woven mat, surrounded by tall maize stalks. Above you, the stars blink, ancient and uncaring. You can almost hear the soil breathing, but don't doze off just yet. We're just getting started. Dawn creeps across the water like spilled honey. A soft orange blush touches the tops of the willows first, then glides down to light up the maze of canals winding through the mighty city of Tenochtitlan. You sit up, still on that chinampa from last night, and now you can actually see the full picture. You're not alone. Canoes begin to glide out from docks like silent arrows, steered by early risers on their way to the markets. The water reflects the pinking sky, broken only by the occasional ripple or paddled wake. A few birds begin their morning gossip, probably spreading the news about who overwatered their squash again. This city isn't just big, it's massive. At its peak, Tenochtitlan housed over 200,000 people, more than most European cities at the same time, all built on a swampy lake bed. Honestly, whoever looked at this soggy mess and said, "Yeah, let's build a metropolis here," deserves an architectural gold medal. Or at least a good nap. As the sun rises, its light hits the temples first. Towering stepped pyramids of stone, glowing warm and golden, dominate the skyline. They're flanked by palaces, courtyards, schools, and open-air plazas. From above, the city looks like a circuit board, organized, interconnected, and humming with activity. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. You're still on the lake's edge, watching the city wake up like some kind of sleepy ghost tourist. And now, the Chinampas aren't quiet gardens anymore. They're bustling micro-farms. Men and women ferry tools and baskets. Someone's already pulling up amaranth greens. A pair of kids are poking a stick into the canal, pretending to fish, but really just whacking the water for fun. You remember doing the same thing as a kid, minus the looming volcanoes? The scent of roasted maize wafts over from the mainland. Someone's already cooking breakfast, and it smells exactly like comfort. The air's still damp, but now it's buzzing with energy. You blink slowly, trying to take in the whole picture. Here's the thing. This city was no accident. Tenochtitlan was built in 1325 after the Mexica people followed a prophecy. Supposedly their god Huitzilopochtli told them to settle where they found an eagle perched on a cactus, eating a snake. Classic ancient god scavenger hunt stuff. They found the sign right here in the middle of a lake. Historians still argue whether the story is myth or clever political branding, but either way, the Mexica said, "Cool, let's do it," and proceeded to build one of the most advanced urban environments of the pre-modern world. Think elevated causeways, aqueducts, and a trash collection system more reliable than some cities have today. Not naming names, but you know who you are. And in the middle of it all, the Chinampas. Not in the city center, but all around it like a wet green halo. They didn't just feed the city, they sustained the empire. The Mexica knew their strength depended on food. You can conquer a lot of people with spears, but you keep them with squash. As you drift closer to the heart of the city, you notice how it all connects. Canals are the highways. Canoes are the cars. People paddle from neighborhood to neighborhood, stopping at small docks that lead to bustling markets and neighborhoods. Everyone's got somewhere to be. On one corner, a man unloads baskets of herbs, chili peppers, and tomatoes. He chats with a priest in flowing white robes who's probably picking up ingredients for some ceremonial stew or a temple brunch. Nearby, a boy is selling frogs out of a bucket. Yep, politely avoid eye contact. The Mexico were clever with their land use. The central city itself sat on a series of artificial islands linked by causeways, and its growth was only possible because of Chinampa farming. That's what gave Tenochtitlan a steady food source even when under siege or during drought, or when neighboring cities refused to trade. Resilience was baked into the mud. Fun aside, the canals were also party zones. Yep. The Mexica had festivals where decorated canoes would drift past each other like float parades. Think water-based Mardi Gras, but with more flower garlands and less questionable decision-making. A canoe nudges gently against your chinampa, and an old woman offers you a tortilla wrapped around steaming beans and squash blossom. You nod gratefully, half asleep, take a bite. It tastes like history. Earthy, warm, and just a little spicy. You immediately regret not grabbing seconds. In the distance, the sun hits the Grand Templo Mayor. A flock of birds lifts into the air like falling confetti in reverse. You've officially entered peak civilization mode, and somehow you haven't even had caffeine. Down in the canals, water spiders skitter across the surface like tiny ghosts. Fishermen drop weighted nets. Merchants paddle with practiced rhythm, baskets stacked high. There's a strange harmony to it all, like the city was designed to hum quietly, not roar. You could fall asleep right here, floating through this ancient metropolis, which honestly makes the whole conquest thing even more tragic. But let's not go there yet. One last thing to notice before you drift into the next phase of your sleepy exploration. These people had schedules, seriously detailed ones. Some Chinampa farmers worked on rotation using a mix of lunar calendars and solar planting guides. They'd plant, rotate, fertilize, and water on such precise cycles that modern agricultural scientists are still trying to copy it. Your modern houseplants are now officially embarrassed? You close your eyes, the canoe rocks gently under you. The air smells of damp stone, hot corn, and lake mist. Somewhere, a flute plays a low, steady melody. Just enough to lull you, but not enough to wake the frogs. You blink slowly the way you do when you're not sure if you're dreaming or just extremely cozy. The city hums in the distance, but you're still on the lake, bobbing gently in a canoe that now drifts past rows of chinampas. From up close, the gardens look even stranger. Not because they float, they actually don't, but because they give off the illusion that they do. Kind of like a magician sawing a lady in half, except it's just corn, and the trick is mud. Let's clear something up once and for all. Chinampas are not really floating. That whole Aztec floating gardens phrase? Total branding fluff. These gardens are actually rooted, anchored deep into the lake bed with willow trees and layers of compacted material. They only look like they're drifting on the surface. So yeah, it's like calling a houseboat a hovercraft. Technically inaccurate, but still cool. The process to build one is straight up genius. First, you start by staking out a rectangle in a shallow part of the lake. You use reeds and wooden posts to frame it, kind of like laying out your raised bed, but on water. Then you layer things. Mud from the lake bottom, vegetation, more mud, old roots, compost, even lake weeds. It's like a very soggy lasagna, except the only thing you'll digest is awe. Once the structure is thick enough, you plant willow trees, ehuejotes, at the corners. Their roots grow down into the lake bed and help keep the whole garden locked in place. If a regular garden is a carpet, a chinampa is a rug duct taped to the floor. Sturdy, permanent, deceptively floaty. You step onto one and it doesn't even wobble. Solid as a sidewalk, but when you dig your fingers into the soil, it's soft and rich. Moist, dark, warm, like chocolate cake left in a sauna. The scent of decomposed water plants rises up with every scoop. Now, these weren't just thrown together haphazardly. The Mexica treated this process like sacred engineering. Chinampas were often aligned in neat, grid-like formations, with canals only a few meters wide between them. It was a landscape of floating rectangles, all fitted together like a patchwork quilt. Viewed from above, it would have looked like Minecraft, but moist. And these gardens weren't small. The average chinampa could be around 30 meters long and 2.5 meters wide, though larger ones could go up to 100 meters. That's big enough to host a whole salsa concert if you're brave, or at least grow a serious amount of squash. Mainstream historians agree that this system wasn't just functional, it was hyper-efficient. One study even suggested chinampas were 5 to 7 times more productive than dry land farms. While European farmers were still hoping their wheat didn't rot or freeze, Mexica farmers were harvesting multiple times a year. Here's a quirky tidbit you didn't ask for, but will definitely never forget. In some chinampa systems, farmers would also grow spirulina, a blue-green algae, as a dietary supplement. Yep, the same trendy powder your gym friend puts in smoothies. You thought that was a TikTok thing? Nah. Aztecs were sipping algae before it was cool. Back to your boat. You trail your hand in the canal beside the chinampa. It's surprisingly cool, even though the morning sun is already heating up the valley. The water's full of nutrients, fish, bugs, and decaying plant material. Not gross, just a natural soup, organic goodness. This water seeps into the chinampa soil from all sides, keeping the plants hydrated with no irrigation systems. It's like having your garden drink itself. You spot a man on the next chinampa over, singing softly as he tends to rows of amaranth. He's using a digging stick called a koa, simple but effective. He pauses to wave. You wave back. He gives a thumbs up. Everyone's got their own love language. There's a serenity to all this. Even the labor seems meditative. Dig. Plant. Pat the soil. Paddle to the next spot. Maybe swap some seeds with your neighbor. Maybe gossip about someone's chili crop mysteriously disappearing last night. Maybe it was a raccoon. Maybe it wasn't. No one saw anything. The city of Tenochtitlan shimmers in the distance, its temples now fully lit by the sun. You notice the causeways connecting it to the mainland, massive roads over water. Canoes glide beneath them like ants on errands. You start to realize that chinampas aren't just farms, they're infrastructure. They feed the people, yes, but they also shape the entire way of life here. Historians still argue whether chinampas were strictly agricultural or also residential. Some say small homes were built on certain chinampas. Others claim those were just temporary huts for farmers to rest during planting seasons. Either way, the distinction blurs. Land and water merge. Work and life are one. And here's another weird detail. Chinampas even influenced religious beliefs. Some myths held that the god of agriculture walked through the chinampas at night, inspecting the crops. Farmers would sometimes leave offerings, cacao, feathers, small figurines, at the edges of their plots. Because, it's always a good idea to bribe the divine quality control inspector. You paddle to the edge of one chinampa and step onto a narrow walkway, a slippery wooden plank that connects to another plot. You're now technically island hopping on man-made land. The wind rustles through the maze. A dragonfly lands on your shoulder. You pretend you're in a Miyazaki movie. It tracks. Suddenly something plops into the canal. Probably a turtle. Or an ancient curse. Either way, you decide not to look. Before you leave this section of the lake, take a moment. Breathe in the damp green air. Let your feet sink just slightly into the soil. This garden beneath you may not float, but it feels like it does. It supports life. It balances water and land in a way modern cities can barely imitate. And it's been doing this for over 600 years. You shift in the canoe, stretching your legs slightly as the breeze picks up. It's midday now, sun high, lake glittering, air thick with the scent of plants, mud, and someone cooking with way too much chili for Chinampa's over. A heron flies overhead, slow and majestic like it's late for a meeting but refuses to rush. You're not entirely sure what time it is, but you know it doesn't matter. Not here. Not now. Ahead of you lies one of the most crucial systems that kept this whole operation from collapsing into a soggy mess. The canals. These watery roads are more than just pretty reflections of clouds. They're veins, circulating life, labor, and lunch throughout the body of the Mexica Empire. The canoe glides into a wider channel. This is basically the Chinampa Expressway. Merchants paddle with practiced ease, balancing baskets piled high with maize, flowers, chili peppers, even live turkeys, which squawk exactly like you'd expect. You scoot over as a high-ranking priest's boat glides past. It's covered in elaborate painted designs and smells faintly of copal incense and high expectations. Canals crisscross the entire city and its Chinampa zone. Some are narrow, just wide enough for one canoe and a couple of suspicious glances. Others are broad, deep arteries, major routes for cargo and ritual processions alike. They connect fields to marketplaces, temples to neighborhoods, even homes to schools. You paddle through one of the medium-sized ones, noticing how well kept it is. The banks are reinforced with woven reed mats, and floating plants skim the surface, filtering impurities like a natural Brita filter. The clarity is impressive. You can even spot tiny fish darting in the shadows. Some of them look edible. Some look like they have personal vendettas. Historians still argue whether these canals were initially planned or if they evolved gradually as the city expanded. But what's clear is that they functioned like a pre-industrial public transit system. Efficient, eco-friendly, and surprisingly social. You're starting to feel like a regular commuter here, minus the earbuds and existential dread. You pass under a simple wooden bridge, its planks sun-bleached and smooth. A group of children leans over the side, tossing crumbs into the water and shrieking with laughter when turtles surface to investigate. One kid sneezes so hard he drops his bread. A nearby fisherman solemnly scoops it up and offers it to a heron. The heron declines, no notes. But it's not all giggles and grains. The Mexica elite controlled these waterways tightly. Canoe traffic could be regulated, taxed even. There were designated landing points, dock stations, and even storage hubs on larger chinampas. You couldn't just roll into town with a boat full of frogs and start peddling them on a whim. There were protocols, market inspectors, ritual checks. You drift by one of the more commercial canals now. A long, covered market floats along the bank, its wooden platforms supported by sturdy pilings. Women in embroidered dresses haggle over the price of tomatillos, while traders unload baskets from stacked canoes. There's a quiet rhythm to it. Voices rising, coins clinking, paddles dipping. You even spot a vendor selling axolotls, those weirdly adorable amphibians that never grow up. They're mostly for food, but maybe also emotional support. Who knows? Here's a little-known tidbit. Canals weren't just for moving goods, they were also strategic defense tools. If enemies tried to storm the city, they'd have to cross narrow, muddy channels while being pelted with arrows from canoe-mounted archers. Not exactly an easy invasion. Think Venice, but with more obsidian-tipped weapons and less accordion music. You squint as the sun reflects off something ahead. It's a ceremonial canoe decorated with bright feathers and painted skulls. Inside, a group of priests chant slowly as they pour something reddish into the water. Probably pulque, a fermented agave drink. It's an offering, you think. Maybe for Tlaloc, the rain god. Or maybe just a really extra way to dispose of leftovers. You pause your paddle to watch. The sound of chanting blends with bird calls and lapping water. A few onlookers bow their heads respectfully. The ceremony is brief but striking. Then the priests paddle off, leaving only a faint ripple behind. The water swallows the moment like it's been doing for centuries. Remember how we talked about the aqueducts earlier? Here's the kicker. Tenochtitlan didn't just use lake water. They also built stone aqueducts to bring in fresh drinking water from springs on the mainland. Double piped, mind you, in case one needed maintenance. Meanwhile, some medieval European cities were still using rivers as shared bathtubs and trash bins. You stop paddling for a moment and just float. The sky is a wide, cloudless sheet of blue. The lake air is heavy but not unpleasant. A dragonfly hovers above your knee, then darts off, bored. You tilt your head back, letting your hands trail in the water. This is what balance looks like. A city that doesn't fight nature, it flows with it. The canals don't divide neighborhoods, they connect them. They don't flood fields, they feed them. There's something deeply peaceful about it all, like the city breathes through these watery lungs. You finally start paddling again, slowly this time, like you're afraid to break the spell. A family of ducks swims by, utterly unimpressed by your presence. You wave anyway, no response. Before the day fades entirely, you make one last stop, a kind of canoe garage where merchants store their paddles and tools. A teenager is repainting the side of his canoe with a design that looks suspiciously like a jaguar doing jazz hands. He sees you looking and grins. You nod in approval. Good vibes only. As the sun begins to tilt westward, the canal glows gold and bronze. Another day passes through this watery city, unbothered, ancient, alive. And somewhere a priest is still trying to figure out how to convince the water gods to quit messing with his irrigation schedule. You lean forward in your canoe now, a little more alert. Just enough to enjoy the unfolding landscape. You're gliding towards something different. Not just fields or markets, but somewhere that whispers old secrets even the maze can't overhear. You're headed toward the sacred edge, a place where chinampas blur into ceremony, where farming wasn't just practical but profoundly spiritual. Because for the Mexica, growing food wasn't just surviving, it was a literal gift to and from the gods. And like all gifts, it had receipts, rituals, returns policies probably. The light changes subtly as you approach. Shadows stretch longer across the rows of plants. You see small shrines tucked at the ends of certain chinampas. Simple things. Carved stones, bundles of herbs, feathers tied with maguey fiber, little clay figurines with expressions that range from serene to absolutely unbothered. This isn't just aesthetic. Chinampa agriculture had deep religious roots. Take Tlaloc, for example, the rain god with goggle eyes and jaguar teeth. He was basically the CEO of crop hydration. People left offerings at the edges of fields, not because it looked cute on Instagram, but because not honoring him could mean drought, or flood, or frogs. So many frogs. You pass a farmer kneeling beside a maize plant. She's whispering something, maybe a prayer, maybe just muttering about slugs again. She offers a few cacao beans to the soil, presses them gently into the earth, and pats it twice like tucking in a sleepy toddler. It's oddly moving. Historians still argue whether these field-side offerings were daily rituals or part of seasonal festivals. Some say they were personal, passed down in families. Others think they were regulated by the state, like having a priest supervisor watching your crop devotion like a divine tax audit. Either way, it worked. The gardens thrived, and the spiritual balance was maintained, more or less. The Mexica didn't mess around with cosmology. Agriculture was woven into their entire worldview. The earth was alive, hungry, and deeply invested in whether your squash came out lumpy. You've probably heard of Huitzilopochtli, the war god, but did you know Kenteyotl, the maize god, had a seasonal feud with him? One brought food, the other demanded sacrifice. Peak sibling drama. And yes, sacrifices happened here too. Not just atop temples with dramatic music, but in the Chinampa fields. Miniature offerings, blood pricked from fingers, animal bones, burnt incense, even dolls made of amaranth dough. Some fields were considered more sacred than others, especially ones closer to temples or springs. If you were really lucky or unlucky, your chinampa was chosen for Tlacaxai Pehualisli, the Flaying Festival. We'll glide past that one quickly. You dock beside a chinampa that feels quieter than the others. Something about it makes you pause. The air feels heavier. There's an altar here, low, moss-covered, surrounded by stones arranged in a spiral. In the center is a tiny statue of Chicomecoatl, goddess of sustenance. She holds maize in each hand, her face both maternal and stern, like someone who'd hug you and then absolutely destroy you at bingo. Someone's just been here. The soil is freshly turned, and the remains of a candle, yellow wax melted into a shell, sits by her feet. You step closer, careful not to disturb anything. There's an odd comfort in how quiet it is, like even the insects are holding their breath. And here's your quirky fact of the day. Some farmers wore charms or amulets made of corn husks, shaped like ears of maize or tiny frogs to protect their crops. Others painted their faces with lake mud during planting to blend in with the earth spirits. You might laugh, but tell that to your friend who insists on wearing lucky socks to every exam. Nearby, a group of kids is reenacting a harvest ceremony. One wears a ridiculous feathered headdress that keeps slipping over his eyes. Another is pretending to be maize, arms stiff at her sides, waiting dramatically for the ceremonial harvest, read a playful shove into the canal. Everyone laughs, including the adults. Ritual doesn't have to be grim. It can be joyful, messy, noisy, human. As you paddle further, you notice how some chinampas are laid out in patterns. Certain alignments might correspond to the sun's path, or to the Aztec calendar. The Tanalpahuali, their sacred 260-day cycle, guided planting and harvesting, with specific days marked as auspicious or cursed for particular crops. You think horoscopes are vague? Try navigating cosmic bean schedules. Some archaeologists believe that certain chinampas even hosted seasonal ceremonies, complete with music, dance, and storytelling. Farmers would gather at specific canal junctions, play drums, burn copal, and pass around pulque. Think of it like a farmer's market, but everyone's a little tipsy and someone's uncle is reciting poetry about corn. And remember the canals? They weren't just practical. During solstices or equinoxes, the positioning of the sun would cause certain shadows or reflections to hit the chinampas in just the right way, turning them into natural sundials. That's not agriculture, that's cosmic landscaping. You glide through one of these zones now and you can feel it. The sense that this isn't just farmland, it's a spiritual circuit, like walking barefoot through a church made of mud and water and light. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear, and instead of flinching, you just smile. It feels like a blessing. You start to see the big picture. To the Mexica, life wasn't separated into neat little boxes. Farming wasn't just food, it was faith. Water wasn't just transportation, it was sacred. Time wasn't just passing, it was ritualized movement. And here in these damp, beautiful chinampas, you are floating through all of it. And okay, maybe you're also a tiny bit sunburnt, but it feels earned. The canoe turns gently down a narrower canal now, the kind that curves like it's shy about being followed. Trees lean in close, shadows gather like curious whispers. You're not sure where you're headed next, but it feels right. Somewhere ahead, someone's lighting incense. Somewhere behind, a heron lands silently in the maze. And somewhere just beneath your boat, the lake stirs softly. Alive. Watching. The air thickens as you paddle deeper into this curving canal, where the chinampas now feel a little less like farms and a little more like secrets. Everything here is quieter, shrouded under drooping willows and woven shade structures. It's cooler too, like the lake itself is sighing out the sun's heat. You instinctively lower your voice even though you're alone. It feels like the right thing to do. You're entering the world of specialized chinampas, those mysterious plots that weren't just for food, but for something extra. Not all chinampas were created equal. Some were reserved for elite crops, rare flowers, medicinal herbs, or sacred plants used in rituals. Others were designated research zones, experimental gardens where farmers and priests tested crop combinations, soil mixes, even lunar planting cycles. Basically, the R&D department of the Mexico world, with a compost pile on the side. You float past a chinampa bursting with marigolds. Bright orange, ridiculous in their boldness, bobbing gently as if they know exactly how stunning they are. These weren't just pretty faces. Cempasúchil flowers were crucial in religious ceremonies, especially those honoring the dead. Their scent was believed to guide spirits home during festivals, and their petals decorated altars across the empire. You inhale deeply. Earthy, sweet, spicy, like sunlight wearing perfume. Nearby, another plot glows pale green with rows of epazote, a pungent herb that's part medicine, part culinary chaos. A farmer crouches among the stalks, carefully snipping leaves and placing them into a tightly woven basket. She nods at you, no smile, but her eyes crinkle at the corners. You can tell she knows things. Probably how to cure a fever, stop a nosebleed, and hex your ex. Just a vibe. Historians still argue whether these specialized chinampas were passed down through families or distributed by the state. Some believe the priesthood selected which families had the spiritual right to grow sacred plants. Others think it was based more on experience, generations of trial and error leading to botanical expertise. Either way, prestige clung to these chinampas like dew. And here's a weird one for your trivia brain. Some chinampas were reserved for hallucinogenic plants, like morning glory or peyote. Used sparingly and in strictly ritual contexts, these weren't your average salad bar picks. They were tools for spiritual vision, administered under supervision during ceremonies. You pass one such chinampa now, tightly fenced and oddly quiet. Even the birds seem to avoid it. The plants are subtle, creeping vines, stout cactus, but there's a hum in the air around them, like the land itself is dreaming. You can't help but wonder about the people who work these plots. Not just farmers, but hybrid roles. Healers, spiritual mediators, maybe even proto-scientists. Their lives were probably more introspective than your average maize grower. Less hauling water, more watching the moon. Less small talk, more obsidian bowl full of dried beetles and mysterious whispers. Suddenly, a burst of laughter echoes from ahead. You round a bend and find a chinampa crowded with colorful ornamental plants. Bright red bromeliads, shock pink dahlias, striped lilies so dramatic they might sue you for looking directly at them. This is one of the florist chinampas, where decorative blooms were cultivated for festivals, palace decor, and market sales. The farmers here are younger, teens and 20-somethings. One wears a tunic covered in floral patterns, and his arms are stained with pollen like a painter who got too excited. They tease each other while weaving reed baskets for transport. One boy tries to balance an entire bouquet on his head. It does not go well. Everyone applauds anyway. You pause here, drawn by the absurdity and beauty of it all. Flowers meant for Tenochtitlan's elite, grown in muddy plots by joyful, sunburned artists. It's the kind of scene that would make any modern city planner weep. Youth employment, sustainable agriculture, and art rolled into one. As you drift past, the canal opens onto a specialized trade hub. Not a giant market, but a small network of trading canoes parked in neat rows. These are the boutique vendors, the Etsy shops of the empire. One woman offers bundles of dried herbs labeled with painted glyphs. Another sharpens obsidian tools under a tarp. A group of men in feathered cloaks inspect baskets of rare blue flowers with the intensity of sommeliers sniffing wine. You overhear one of them mutter something about last year's batch being too acidic. Wild. You learn something else here. Not all chinampas were public or communal. Some belonged exclusively to noble families, guilds, or religious orders. These plots had guards, contracts, inspections. If a plant died, someone probably got a strongly worded letter from a priest with a very dramatic feather pen. One particularly pristine chinampa catches your eye. Everything's symmetrical. Every plant is trimmed, placed, perfect. You hear a faint bell ringing and realize this is a ritual garden, probably tied to a nearby temple. You spot figures moving slowly along the rows, priests, maybe apprentices. They walk barefoot, faces painted, whispering chants that blend into the breeze. And here's something fringy. Some chinampas were said to host animal spirits or guardians. Farmers would leave little effigies at the corners. Tiny owls, dogs, frogs carved from stone or clay. If crops failed, it might mean the spirit was offended. If they flourished, you best believe that chinampa got a fresh chicken offering. You pass one of these guardian statues now. A squat dog with wide, round eyes and a goofy smile. Someone's tucked a flower behind one ear. He looks like he's been protecting this plot for centuries and loving every minute of it. Time starts to blur again. The light has shifted, less sharp, more golden. You paddle lazily, no destination in mind. There's something comforting about knowing these chinampas weren't just farms. They were microcosms of culture. Medicine, art, ritual, science, gossip. Each one a world. As you float along, you catch faint flute music drifting across the water. A frog croaks, deeply offended by something. The scent of burning herbs follows you like a gentle nudge. And somewhere, a specialized farmer is quietly mixing dried petals and crushed bark into a healing salve that will soothe a noblewoman's fever before sunrise. The flute music trails off as you continue gliding through the canals. The golden light softens even more, like someone's gently dimming the world with a heavy velvet curtain. You've entered a region of the lake that feels older somehow, less maintained. The chinampas here are a little wilder, edges soft with creeping vines, fences half buried in moss. But don't be fooled, this isn't neglect. This is history growing itself thick. You've reached the abandoned and ancestral chinampas, a realm where the past hasn't been cleaned up or painted over. It just stayed. These plots were once thriving, bursting with beans, maize, squash, song. Now they sit in varying degrees of surrender, half reclaimed by water, half sheltering the quiet stories of those who came before. You slow your paddling. There's no rush here. The air itself feels denser, wrapped in memory. A heron stalks through the shallows, utterly uninterested in your presence. You're a guest in its cathedral now, so why were chinampas abandoned? Historians still argue about that. Some say natural causes. Floods, invasive plants, shifts in the lake's hydrology forced people to let them go. Others point to political shifts, wars, forced labor campaigns, or the redirection of resources. Maybe even superstition. Certain plots believed cursed after bad harvests or tragic deaths. You dock beside one particularly overgrown plot. Papyrus grass leans into the canal, forming a green curtain. You part it carefully and step onto spongy ground. Under your feet, you can still feel the faint structure, wood lattice beneath mud, gravel, root. But it's soft now, loose, like a memory you almost remember. Near the center is a collapsed hut, half swallowed by ivy. The thatch roof has caved in, but inside you find traces. A rusted tool, a clay pot, a wooden idol broken at the neck but still stubbornly smiling. Someone lived here. Someone loved this piece of earth. Here's your fringe fact. Some abandoned chinampas became ritual sites for the dead. Families would return each year to leave offerings, light incense, speak names aloud so they wouldn't vanish into the soil. In a few cases, the dead themselves were buried beneath the plots, their bones feeding the same earth that fed their descendants. It's not spooky. It's intimate. You're literally walking over a family album, one root at a time. You head back to your canoe and drift onward. The canal is quieter here, but not silent. You start to notice the birdsong, the kind you didn't hear in the bustling zones. Kingfishers flash like blue coins. A hawk circles overhead, letting out a single cry that echoes through the water corridors. You pass an abandoned chinampa with something strange on it. Rows of vertical sticks, sharpened and leaning at odd angles. At first you think it's a trap or fence, but then you realize they're remnants of a water clock, or possibly a planting calendar. Some scholars believe farmers use simple wooden markers to track sun angles and seasons. Others think they were spiritual, not functional, offerings to the gods of time and decay. Either way, the sticks are still standing, weather-worn, defiant. You salute them as you glide past. Further along, you come across a group of kids playing on a half-submerged chinampa. They're laughing, splashing, daring each other to jump from one half-rotted log to another. One of them waves at you with a long reed, like he's a wizard in training. You wave back, slightly more majestic than necessary. Their parents are nearby, fishing quietly or weaving baskets. You realize this abandoned zone isn't totally abandoned. Some families repurpose the old chinampas for foraging, firewood, or just free space. No one owns them now, which means they belong to everyone. A kind of public memory garden. You float beside one family's boat where a grandmother is teaching her granddaughter how to spot edible greens among the weeds. "Not that one," she says, tapping a fuzzy leaf with her paddle. "That one makes your stomach dance too much." The girl giggles, memorizing, and here's a detail you'd miss on a tourist map. Even the abandoned chinampas are connected to identity. Locals give them names. Ghost Garden, Hummingbird Patch, place where the tree fell and no one cared. It's affectionate, familiar. The past is personal here. You pull over near another old plot and spot something strange. A pile of obsidian flakes neatly stacked under a flat stone. Not garbage. A cache. Tools, maybe? Offerings? Or just a mason's forgotten kit? You sit for a while staring at the glinting edges. They look like teeth, or memories sharpened into glass. The wind rustles through the reeds, and for a moment you swear you hear singing. A woman's voice, faint and rising. Then gone. Maybe just the wind, maybe not. You glide past another plot where tall grasses form a perfect spiral. Nature's accidental art installation. You take a mental photo, no likes needed, and just when you think it's all ruins and ghosts, you spot a fresh sapling planted right in the middle of a long-forgotten chinampa. Someone started something here. A second chance, maybe. Or just an experiment. Either way, it stands there, green and defiant, swaying gently like it knows it's being watched. You leave the abandoned zone quietly. No big farewell. Just a soft ripple of your paddle and the echo of crickets starting their evening symphony. It's not sad. It's not spooky. It's just another layer. An old skin the city has shed, still warm from when it pulsed with life. The canal straightens. The light fades further into rose and indigo. Somewhere ahead, the signs of civilization begin again. Brighter plots, busier boats. But for now, you sit back and savor the stillness. Behind you, the ghost gardens rest. You barely notice the shift at first, lulled by the rhythm of your paddle and the soft, watery hush of twilight. But soon the world around you sharpens, colors returning, sounds layering in. You've entered the zone of urban chinampas, where the floating gardens of the countryside blend into the very bones of Tenochtitlan itself. It's jarring and kind of brilliant. One moment you're surrounded by reeds and frog calls, the next, you're gliding past a market stall built directly onto a chinampa, its owner shouting prices over the soft clink of ceramic bowls. Bright awnings flap like sails overhead. Parrots chatter. A boy paddles by holding a tray of tamales wrapped in maize leaves, offering you one with an unbothered, practiced nod. This is what made the Mexica capital unique, a city that didn't push nature out but invited it in. The chinampas here form an intricate network inside the urban sprawl, blending seamlessly with temples, homes, and marketplaces. Raised paths and wooden walkways thread through the canals, forming bridges between commerce and cultivation. You float past a woman tending a rooftop garden that extends down onto the chinampa below. Vertical agriculture, Aztec style. Squash blossoms climb ladders. Tomatoes hang like ornaments. And you spot a baby asleep in a reed cradle between two sturdy cornstalks. The urban garden, weaponized. Historians still debate whether these chinampas were city regulated or managed by individual families. Some records suggest municipal oversight, with appointed garden inspectors making sure crops weren't neglected. Others hint at a more informal system, a sort of neighborhood pride contest. One priest's chili pepper patch was apparently famous for making warriors cry, from both ends. These city chinampas weren't just for food. You pass plots blooming with color-coded flowers used in social ceremonies. Yellow for weddings, red for birth blessings, purple for death rites. A canoe full of flower bundles floats past you, its oarswoman humming as she arranges them by hue. It looks like a living Pantone catalog, if Pantone could chant in Nahuatl. And then you hear it. Music. Real music this time, not the imagined kind. You follow the sound to a gathering on a large chinampa, where performers are putting on a public festival. Not a massive empire-wide ritual, but a neighborhood affair. There's a drum circle, dancers in jaguar print loincloths, and kids daring each other to jump over a fire pit, while parents pretend not to see. It's chaos, it's joy. It's the chinampa as communal space, equal parts farm, stage, and playground. You drift closer and notice how the chinampa has been adapted. Corners reinforced with stone, soil flattened into a kind of open-air amphitheater. Someone hands you a warm drink in a carved gourd. It smells like cinnamon and maize. You sip it slowly and try not to fall too hard for a civilization that balanced agriculture and EDM before either had names. Just behind this festival chinampa, you catch sight of something even more unexpected. A school garden. You recognize it by the painted clay plaques showing pictograms of plants, tools, and rituals. A teacher, barefoot and totally unfazed, is holding up a chili pepper and asking the students to chant its name. They do so with great enthusiasm and minor giggling. The idea of classroom gardens isn't new, but here it's beautifully integrated. Kids learn to read glyphs while pruning amaranth. They practice counting with maize cobs. It's both curriculum and lunch. One boy in the corner is trying to feed a worm to a beetle. You silently wish him luck and low expectations. Here's your quirky fact for this round. The city had floating gardens that served as performance venues for poetry competitions. Imagine open mic night, but on a canoe, and you have to rhyme in a dead language while wearing feathers. The audience? Mixed crowd? Nobles, commoners, the occasional confused heron. Winners sometimes received capes. Losers got lighthearted teasing, and maybe a symbolic splash from a clay cup of water. Brutal. You paddle past another chinampa that seems quieter, darker, almost shadowed. At first you think it's abandoned, but then you spot figures, silent, robed, kneeling beside plots of mushrooms. You've stumbled into one of the spiritual chinampas, reserved for meditation, mourning, or magic. The air smells like copal resin and damp earth. Someone strikes a small gong. The sound rolls across the water like a pebble thrown into silence. Historians still argue whether these urban ritual chinampas were state-sanctioned or grassroots. Some evidence suggests temple affiliations. Others imply they were tolerated like low-key neighborhood shrines. What's clear is that these spaces were carved out, protected and sacred. Sometimes you just need a quiet place to talk to your gods between your kids' tamale fights. As night finally wraps itself around the lake, the chinampas begin to glow. No electricity here, but that doesn't stop the city from shining. Floating braziers are lit on the corners of many plots, casting soft, golden circles on the water. You pass a couple snuggled beneath a maguey fiber shawl, sharing roasted squash and watching the moon reflect off the ripples. You try not to stare, you fail. Even the animals get in on the evening mood. You spot a dog curled up on a compost heap, a cat stalking fireflies, and yes, a chinampa goose that honks with genuine opera energy. 10 out of 10 performance, no notes. Finally, you pull your canoe up beside a garden lit with little bowls of oil. A man is seated cross-legged beside a row of beans, whispering to them. Not metaphorically, he's literally talking to his plants. You hear the words, "Grow strong, little ones," and your heart cracks open a little. This is the beating heart of the Mexica capital. Not just pyramids and warriors and gold, but gardens that breathe, laugh, teach, and remember. The city built on water didn't just rise, it grew. And you're a little drunk on it now. On the blend of scent, shadow, and tradition. On how impossibly alive everything feels. Time to keep drifting. The night has fully arrived now, but it doesn't feel dark. The city glows, not with neon or electricity, but with purpose. The kind of light that comes from 1,000 small fires, each with its own quiet mission. You drift forward, deeper into the living veins of the Chinampa network, and find yourself face to face with something big, literal and symbolic. The great market of Tlatelolco, rising like a dream on solid ground, but surrounded by its own web of canals and chinampas, pulsing with life even under the stars. By day, this was the economic supernova of the Mexico world, tens of thousands of people converging daily to buy, sell, barter, and gossip. At night, it softens. Merchants sit on overturned baskets, quiet counting cacao beans. Yes, actual money here. A man snores beside a pile of fish. A teenage girl plucks petals from a marigold and drops them one by one into the canal, probably making a wish or cursing someone's hairline. Or both. Even in the soft hush of night, the market's bones are clear. You float past stacked chinampas used for crop display, corn bundled in geometric towers, tomatoes arranged like pyramids, even exotic herbs laid out with obsessive symmetry. These weren't just produce aisles, they were branding campaigns. Want to sell your squash for top price? Better arrange them into a spiral with an obsidian shard centerpiece. We're talking peak Aztec Pinterest. You catch a whiff of something sharp? Fermented maguey? Nope. Floating taverns, that's right. Some chinampas were adapted into open-air bars, serving pulque and gossip by the gourdful. One boat glides by, its passengers slurring lullabies while their canoe drifts slightly off course into some reeds. You offer no judgment. You just paddle around them like a silent witness to joy. Now here's a weird tidbit. Some chinampas were used for pet trading. Dogs, parrots, even exotic jaguar cubs were occasionally sold from these garden rafts. The idea of a floating pet store is bizarrely adorable. Historians still argue whether this was a regular occurrence or limited to feast seasons when nobles felt extra spendy. One thing's clear. You would 100% have left with a duck in a basket. You pass a darkened plot that smells like cocoa. Literally chocolate in the air. You blink and realize it's not a dream. One of the chinampas was used for cacao cultivation, likely a private one run by an elite merchant family. Growing cacao at this altitude was tricky. Usually it came from the hot lowlands, but wealthy merchants could sponsor experimental plots. A tiny cocoa research and luxury lab. On a raft. The most Aztec thing ever. You pause as a boat glides by stacked with obsidian blades. Not for war, these are surgical. That's right, urban chinampas sometimes hosted medical vendors, peddling herbs, poultices, and tools. You imagine buying cough syrup from a canoe parked next to a garden of skullcap and valerian. You're halfway tempted to ask if they have anything for existential dread. Or dry skin. And here, amid the noise and the lull, you see the chinampa's other function. Diplomacy. One plot, much larger than the others, has stone inlays, fancy painted awnings, and guards. This isn't a farm, it's a diplomatic garden, a neutral meeting space where emissaries came to hash out trade agreements, marriages, or occasionally threaten each other in very polite Nahuatl. The setting mattered. Surrounded by green, the message was clear. Let's grow something, not burn it. You pass a sculpture at the Chinampa's edge. Two jaguars intertwined around a maize stalk. The symbolism is over the top and perfect. You nod at it like it just made a good point. You start noticing the small details that hold this floating city together. Every few chinampas, there are dedicated waste plots, places where compost is processed and returned to the soil. It's not glamorous, but it's genius. The entire city functioned like a digestive system. Clean inputs, efficient reuse, nothing wasted. You wonder how your own city back home would handle floating infrastructure. Probably terribly. But here, it just works. And the people? You almost forgot how intimate the scale is, even in a mega metropolis. Every chinampa feels owned, loved. Whether it's a grandmother watering amaranth at 10 p.m. or a pair of teens carving hearts into a pumpkin vine, this place is deeply, insistently personal. There's a theory, fringe but lovely, that each chinampa held a guardian spirit, a kind of plant-based familiar tied to that plot's productivity. Farmers would leave offerings at the corners, honey, songs, even feathers. Historians can't agree if it was superstition or sincere religion, but you're not about to test it. You toss a breadcrumb into the water, just in case. Somewhere a flute begins again, soft and slow. You turn your canoe toward the sound. The canal opens into a plaza where 3 massive chinampas have been fused together. It's not a market, not a garden. It's a floating archive, a space for knowledge. Stone tablets line the outer walkways, each etched with glyphs, stories, records of harvests, droughts, marriages, eclipses. A priest moves among them, brushing moss off the edges, whispering as he reads. You paddle slowly around the edge. The glyphs shimmer in the moonlight. One shows a man planting maize under the gaze of a jaguar-headed sun. Another shows a woman balancing water jars on a bridge made of skulls. You try not to over-interpret. You probably should have paid more attention in Symbolism 101. And then, on the far side of the archival garden, you spot something tender. A wall of painted baby footprints, each marked with a name and a date. A blessing wall, a promise that even the tiniest souls are rooted here. You float by silently. Even your paddle respects this moment. The breeze shifts. You smell burnt chili, wet earth, and flowers. It's strangely perfect. The city, the chinampas, the night, they've merged into something greater than a sum of parts. A biosphere of memory, trade, ceremony, and survival. Tenochtitlan wasn't just a city. It was a floating agreement between humanity and the lake. And right now, you're part of that agreement. It's getting late, like really late. But the city doesn't sleep. Not in the conventional sense. It rests, sure, it breathes a little softer, but even in the hush, there's motion. A kind of slow, sacred maintenance. You're not a tourist anymore. You're something quieter now. A watcher, a dreamer with dirty feet. You ease past a small, narrow chinampa where an old man is trimming vines under the glow of an oil lamp. Not hurried, not stressed. Just methodical, meditative. His hands know every leaf. You wonder how many decades he's been whispering to this patch of earth and water. It's not farming anymore. It's prayer with a harvest. You blink, and another scene emerges. Nighttime rituals unfolding like clockwork. On one garden plot, a family builds a small offering platform. On it, tortillas, beans, a clay pot of water, and a carved figurine of Sipe Totec, the god of renewal. They're not speaking, but you can feel the reverence in every movement. It's not loud, it's not performative. It's ancestral memory with muscle memory attached. Historians still debate whether these rituals were formally scheduled or just part of the family's rhythm. Some evidence suggests a calendar tracked by community priests. Others argue that many households followed their own intuitive cycles. Either way, the chinampa isn't just for growing food. It's for growing connection. You drift past another ritual, but this one is way weirder. A group of young warriors in training are gathered on a long, rectangular chinampa, balancing on one leg in complete silence. At first you think it's a yoga class, but then one of them wobbles and falls into the water with a spectacular splash. No one laughs. Instead, the instructor, stern, carved from obsidian energy, nods at the others to keep going. Turns out some chinampas doubled as training arenas. Warriors practiced balance, coordination, and stealth among the crops, sneaking through squash rows, stalking each other between maize stalks, vaulting between rafts in full gear. Because if you can stay silent on floating mud, you can stay silent anywhere. Here's your quirky fact. Some chinampas were designed to sink on purpose. Yep, trap chinampas. Built as decoys around military zones, they were deliberately less stable. Enemy canoes chasing retreating Mexico warriors might speed onto these rafts, only to have them collapse into sludge. It was agriculture meets warfare meets practical joke. Kind of genius, kind of rude. The idea of garden warfare probably shouldn't make you smile, but here you are, snorting into the humid night like a loon. You quickly pretend it was just a cough. As you paddle past another cluster of chinampas, you hear laughter again. This time, soft, private. A couple sits on the edge of their plot, legs dangling in the water. She's braiding flowers into his hair while he pretends to hate it. It's the kind of affection that says, "We survived the planting season together." In other words, true love. Then you spot it. A chinampa inheritance ceremony. A child, maybe 10, is standing beside her parents, facing a small clay altar. On it lies a maize cob wrapped in a woven sash. Her father presses her palm to the cob. Her mother chants. It's not loud, not dramatic, but it's binding. This isn't just symbolic, it's legal. Chinampas could be passed down through families, and these rites made it official. Notarized by the gods. Modern historians still argue whether this counted as personal property in the European sense, but one thing is clear. Land was identity. If your ancestors tilled this raft, your bloodline belonged to it too. You move on, but the emotion lingers. Then comes a jarring change. A maintenance crew, rowing in perfect formation. These aren't casual gardeners. These are the elite canal workers, responsible for clearing silt, reinforcing barriers and dredging water channels at night to prevent blockage or overflow. They move with precision, their tools gleaming, their canoes rigged for function. Urban legends say these crews were trained like warriors, and from the way they maneuver, you believe it. One of them salutes you silently as they pass. You nod back, pretending you're on official business too. You glance to the right and suddenly freeze. There, in the mist, is a ceremonial chinampa dedicated entirely to the moon. It's silver-washed, covered in pale flowers. Lilies, white marigolds, and something that might be ghost pepper blossoms, glowing faintly. A lone figure kneels in the center, arms raised toward the sky. Their robe glitters with obsidian dust. You've wandered into a lunar observatory garden, used by priest astronomers to track time, tides, and omens. The raised rows form specific sight lines. A carefully angled stone reflects the moonlight through a lens of polished jade. This isn't just science or religion. It's both, fused in the stillness of night and flower. You whisper involuntarily, "Whoa!" No one answers, but the moon seems to nod. You pass another chinampa and hear a different kind of sound, a slow, rhythmic scraping. It's a sculptor etching a story into a garden wall. His tool moves steadily, carving maize stalks and jaguar prints, a canoe, a serpent. This is his diary, his memory journal. The chinampa holds more than food. It holds identity. You get it now. Every raft is a microverse. And then a dog barks. It's not majestic. It's not symbolic. It's just some scruffy Zoloid squently yelling at a turtle and scaring itself in the process. You exhale a quiet laugh. The spell breaks. Just a little. But that's the balance of this place. Reverence with a splash of ridiculous. You glance upward and notice wooden poles strung with drying herbs hung between chinampas like laundry. The smell is rich. Sage, epazote, maybe some hallucinogenic morning glory. It's a pharmacy on the breeze. One boat nearby is delivering bundles to healers and midwives, who use chinampas not just to grow medicine, but to anchor whole ecosystems of care. Historians still can't agree on the extent of Aztec medical knowledge. Some claim sophisticated surgical procedures and herbal mastery. Others are more cautious, noting that records are fragmented. But what's indisputable is the centrality of plants, real, living, green things, growing beside every prayer, song, and calculation. You close your eyes just for a second. Let the humid breath of the city wrap around you. The sound of water against wood. The whisper of night wind through maize. The pulse of drums in the far distance. The lake holds you and the gardens remember you. When you open them again, the moon is higher. The city is quieter. But the work, the love, the story, still growing. Somewhere between tired and enchanted, you float farther into the liquid veins of the city. The Chinampas have shifted. Not in shape, but in tone. There's something heavier here. Denser, more ancient. You can feel it in your chest before your eyes catch up. Welcome to the sacred Chinampas, where agriculture meets divinity head-on. You pass a floating plot that's glowing faintly. Fireflies, sure, but also rows of plants arranged in concentric circles like a crop mandala. At the center, an altar shaped like a maize kernel, carved from volcanic stone and stained red from old pigment. Offerings lie at its base, obsidian flakes, feather bundles, the occasional squash shaped like a heart. These aren't your grandma's gardening beds. This is ritual farming, believed to be watched over by Chicomacolol, the maize goddess herself. Every action here is loaded with intention. How seeds are placed, how water is poured, how songs are sung during planting. You're not just growing food, you're growing the favor of the gods. Historians still argue whether these Chinampas were exclusive to priests or shared in rotation by different clans. Some glyphs suggest a lottery system, others hint at divine dreams choosing the caretakers. Either way, not just anyone could touch this dirt. You float closer and notice something even stranger. A mirror made of polished obsidian propped up at the altar's edge, angled toward the water. At first you think it's just decoration, then you realize it's meant to reflect the sun and the lake at once. A fusion of fire and water, sky and earth. A selfie for the gods, basically. And just when you think that's the most mystical thing you'll see tonight, a soft drumming begins. You turn and spot another sacred Chinampa. This one surrounded by women in white robes, standing in the shallow water, arms raised in unison. One by one, they begin a slow, synchronized planting ritual, burying kernels of maize while singing a chant that shivers the air. You don't know the words, but your bones understand the rhythm. The scene is hypnotic, and yeah, maybe your eyes well up a little. But don't worry, we'll call it lake mist. Then, from the corner of your eye, you catch something totally unexpected. A priest in ceremonial garb using a chinampa as a giant stage. A crowd watches as he pantomimes the story of Quetzalcoatl's journey into the underworld to bring back maize for humanity. He leaps between planted rows, cape fluttering, a flint knife raised in mock battle. It's kind of incredible. Turns out Chinampas weren't just gardens or altars, they were theaters too. Floating platforms for education, reenactment, even comedic plays. Yes, the Aztecs had sketch comedy. Yes, it probably included maize jokes. Historians are still unsure how formal these performances were, but enough murals survived to confirm the tradition existed. You imagine a seasonal Chinampa improv troupe. Now that's a Netflix pitch. As you pass by, one of the actors winks at you from behind a carved coyote mask. You paddle faster, suddenly shy. But not everything here is loud. You drift toward a quieter corner and stumble on something that looks wrong. A Chinampa that's overgrown, crumbling at the edges. No rows, no signs of care, just a tangle of weeds and mud. You're about to write it off as abandoned when you notice the bundle of cloth at its center. Tied with reed and shell, wrapped like a gift or a burial. This is a forgotten Chinampa, and it carries stories of loss. Maybe the caretaker died. Maybe the family moved. Maybe it was cursed. Who knows? But every city, no matter how divine, has its shadows. You pause, out of respect, out of something else you can't name. Then gently, you move on. Another Chinampa comes into view. Beautiful, yes, but different. Less ceremonial, more experimental. Raised beds twist into spirals, and the rows are staggered, not straight. You realize what you're seeing, a research Chinampa, possibly run by pre-scientists. The Aztecs didn't just grow food, they studied how it grew, which plants thrived together, what times of moonlight yielded stronger roots, how volcanic ash or crushed bone improved the yield. It's like a floating agri-lab from the future. You half expect to see someone wearing safety goggles and a clipboard. And there it is, the most Gen Z of sacred farming. A 3-plant polyculture, growing maize, beans, and squash in tight formation. The 3 sisters intertwined like a DNA helix. Maize gives height, beans fix nitrogen, squash shades the soil. A perfect system. It's elegant, it's efficient, it's ancient. And ironically, it could solve a lot of modern problems if we just copied our ancestors. You keep drifting, and soon the sacred fades back into the everyday. A woman is scrubbing clothes at the edge of a family Chinampa, humming to herself. A boy chases a frog with a stick, and the frog is clearly winning. Life resumes its rhythm. But something inside you has shifted. You thought this was just about agriculture. Floating gardens, waterlogged productivity. But it's more. It's everything. Economy, ritual, education, art, science, family, performance. These Chinampas are the operating system of a civilization. And somehow in this quiet night journey, you've been logged in. One last sight before you leave the sacred district. A small clay statue of Tlaloc, god of rain, tucked beside a tomato vine. A bit chipped, a little mossy, but clearly loved. You nod at him, silently promising to water your own plants more often. He does nod back, but you get the feeling he heard you anyway. By now, your arms ache a little from paddling. Okay, fine, dream paddling. But you can't stop. The floating city is a maze, and every corner hides a new revelation. You glide along a quiet channel, half expecting the lake itself to lean in and whisper something profound. Instead, you get a splash. Probably a fish. Probably not a ghost. Probably. The city shifts again. Less sacred now, more strategic. You've arrived at the military-adjacent Chinampas, where floating gardens meet national defense. Because, yeah, when your empire spans 80,000 square miles, logistics matter. And so does lunch. These aren't quiet prayer gardens or family farms. They're vast, organized, and incredibly well defended. Soldiers patrol the borders in canoes, eyes sharp, spears ready. You get the sense that if you touch the wrong cornstalk, you'd suddenly discover 5 ways to be subdued by someone wearing a feathered helmet. Turns out some Chinampas near military zones were designed exclusively for army provisioning. They grew high-calorie, storable crops, dried beans, amaranth, squash. Stuff that could survive long journeys or feed entire battalions. Modern scholars still debate whether these were state-owned or managed by noble clans with military contracts, but either way, these gardens were engines of war. Silent, green, and deceptively peaceful. And here's the kicker. They didn't just grow food. You float past one Chinampa bordered with low hedges and realize it's growing dye plants, specifically cochineal cactus. Those tiny white bugs you barely notice? When crushed, they make one of the most valuable red dyes in the ancient world. Soldiers wore crimson sashes dyed from these bugs, not just for fashion, but to signal rank and status. Imagine gearing up for battle in armor and a color-coded garden cape. Peak Aztec. Nearby, another Chinampa has rows of dried gourds being hollowed and sealed. These aren't decorations, they're portable canteens. You're watching ancient military supply chains in action. And it's weirdly comforting to know that somewhere, an Aztec logistics officer probably lost sleep over shipment delays, just like someone in a modern Amazon warehouse. Then, off to the side, a massive training field disguised as a garden. At first you think it's just another maize chinampa, but then you notice the rows are spaced unusually wide, and the crops are arranged in spirals and zigzags, creating a kind of natural obstacle course. You catch a group of young warriors sprinting through the gaps, vaulting over vines, shouting to one another in Nahuatl. Their agility is unreal. You spot one trip, fall into a mud pit, and immediately pretend it was part of the drill. Classic. Historians still argue whether military training on Chinampas was formalized or improvised. Some claim it was just a backup space when temples were full. Others argue these gardens were specifically built as stealth training grounds. The truth, like most things, is probably in the middle and possibly covered in tomato vines. Your quirky tidbit for this section? Some warriors were trained to camouflage themselves as scarecrows. No joke. During ambush drills, they'd dress in dried corn husks and perch on stilts near the fields, motionless for hours. The goal? Blend into the Chinampa and surprise any invader dumb enough to get close. You try not to laugh, but the mental image is too much. A grown man popping up like a haunted hay bale. Iconic. Then, a strange shift. The channel narrows, the air thickens. You've entered the spy corridor. Yep, Aztec espionage was real. While not as Hollywood as you're imagining, the Empire did employ scouts and messengers, some of whom used Chinampas to monitor border activity and slip undetected into enemy zones. One record even describes Chinampas covered in reeds and painted like the lake surface to hide supplies or troops. You float past what looks like a totally normal raft until the water ripples weirdly and the whole thing slowly rotates to reveal a false bottom hiding a canoe. Is that a secret exit? A floating panic room? Either way, you're deeply impressed. Off to the side, a quiet elder sits on the edge of a plain-looking Chinampa, writing glyphs into a codex with a turkey feather. His garden is sparse, mostly wild grasses and a few scattered marigolds. But he's not here for food. He's recording military garden data. Crop yields, tactics, positions, strategy. It's like a floating pentagon with sunflowers. You try to float away unnoticed, but he gives you a little nod. One historian to another. Past the military section, you hit a new patch. Prisoner Chinampas. Yeah, these exist. They're not jails in the modern sense. No cells, no iron bars. But these floating gardens were used as labor zones for captured enemies, especially those not destined for ritual sacrifice. Bound in pairs, the prisoners worked under supervision, building new Chinampas, maintaining canals, and harvesting under watchful eyes. It was punishment, sure, but also integration. Some were eventually absorbed into society, their children growing up speaking Nahuatl and tending the same mud they once feared. It's dark, complicated, but also real. You pass one of these Chinampas, now long abandoned, and imagine what it felt like to work that soil, knowing you were both enemy and seed. It's one of those thoughts that lingers behind your ribs. But balance, right? On the next Chinampa, a young boy is teaching his puppy to paddle. The pup, tiny, frantic, and completely uncoordinated, keeps trying to bite the oar. The boy laughs so hard he falls into the water. You laugh too. Loud, wet, alive. Because even in a military garden, life insists on being ridiculous sometimes. By now, the city's breathing has slowed. The wind has softened. Somewhere, a flute plays the same 4 notes again and again, and it feels like a lullaby for the entire lake. And you? You're not just floating anymore. You're part of the current now. You paddle on, deeper into the city's watery heart. By now, even the frogs seem sleepy, their croaks soft and spaced out like they're taking turns sighing. The sky above is velvet black, but the stars have sharpened. And you? You've officially entered the realm of the strange, the clever, the utterly Aztec-level genius. Because this stretch of Chinampas, it's the engineering zone, the kind of place where nature and architecture shake hands and go, let's do something weird. At first glance, these Chinampas don't look much different. Same narrow rows, same willow roots kissing the water. But look closer. See how they tilt just slightly toward the canals? That's not erosion. That's intentional water management. Every Chinampa here is sloped just a little to direct runoff during floods, like tiny green gutters floating on a lake. Historians still debate how widespread this technique was. Some think it was reserved for high-status families with access to engineering priests. Others argue it was community knowledge passed on like a really good guacamole recipe. Either way, it's clever, and it works. Then you see something even more amazing. A group of men using baskets of mud tied to floating gourds to create brand new Chinampas. They toss the baskets overboard, let them sink, then pile reeds and soil on top, layer by layer. It's a time-consuming process, but it works. Slowly, patiently, they're building their land out of lake. You can't help but stare. It's like watching Earth be born in real time. And here's a fact to keep you awake. Some of these Chinampas, the ones still visible today around Xochimilco, they're literally centuries old, still producing crops using the exact same layering method. That's not agriculture. That's legacy. As you pass another Chinampa, you see an unusual structure rising at its center. It's a tall bamboo scaffold, maybe 2 stories high, anchored by obsidian stones and lashed together with maguey fiber. Hanging from its top beam is a clay bowl. It swings gently in the wind. You squint. It's a barometric rain sensor, or at least the Aztec equivalent, designed to tip and spill when enough moisture collects. A kind of ancient weather app, predicting rain or signaling drought. There are no push notifications, but the clay bowl's still got drip. Nearby, a group of children sits around a water clock. Yes, a water clock. A ceramic jar with a hole in the bottom, slowly dripping into another vessel. They're learning how to tell time not by the sun or stars, but by water. A literal liquid schedule. You wonder if their version of detention is getting splashed. One of them pours too fast. Another starts giggling. Their teacher, an older woman with silver streaks in her braids, gives them a look. You know that look. It transcends time and geography. The universal teacher glare. You drift farther, and now the Chinampas get strange. Experimental. One's shaped like a spiral galaxy. Another looks like a massive glyph, visible only from above. You spot one that seems to float a few inches higher than the rest. How? You get closer. Turns out it's built with buoyant pumice stones, stolen from a volcanic field, layered beneath the soil. The thing floats like a pool noodle for gods. Historians still argue whether this technique was common or experimental. Some say it was just a weird phase by one eccentric engineer priest who thought Chinampas should defy physics. Others insist it was a high-tech secret passed between elite builders. Either way, you're watching the result float right in front of you, stable and smug. Here's your quirky tidbit. Aztecs once used human hair, collected during temple rituals, to bind mud layers together in certain Chinampas. Why? Possibly for symbolic protection. Possibly because hair is strong and water resistant. Possibly because someone said, hey, let's see what happens. Science and superstition. Classic combo. You reach a more orderly patch of Chinampas next. Grid-like and pristine, everything spaced with almost obsessive precision. Welcome to the botanical lab gardens. These weren't just for growing food. These were for testing species. How different herbs responded to shade. How soil acidity changed root length. How maize cross-pollinated with wild grasses. You're looking at proto-genetic engineering, minus the glowing lab coats and clicky pens. A priest in dark robes, face partially covered, walks slowly between rows of seedlings. He pauses at each one, murmuring to himself, tapping wooden tags into the ground. You realize he's not praying. He's labeling. Species, lineage, and planting time. a silent data collector. The Aztecs weren't just religious, they were deeply empirical. They studied patterns obsessively. Some chinampas were even planted wrong on purpose just to see what would happen. That's dedication. That's chaos science. And not far from him, two teens are having a mud ball fight, undoing all that scientific order with pure, joyful destruction. You watch one slip, land in a puddle, and start cackling. The priest doesn't even flinch. This, too, is part of the system. You pass a plot covered in nothing but moss and lichen, arranged like a green chessboard. It's not a mistake. It's a climate chinampa, a garden grown purely to track air moisture, fog density, and fungal movement. Why? To predict droughts. Or perhaps to learn how to prevent future agricultural collapse. Their data? Stored in spoken memory and glyph-covered bark. And in the distance, a half-finished chinampa, a raised grid of reeds still waiting for its first scoop of mud. You watch as a young couple wades into the water, arms full of lakebed soil. They're laughing, arguing over angles, building their future. You realize you're watching a kind of wedding. Not of people, but of land and water. This floating city? It's alive because people kept asking, what else can it do? And now you know, it can do almost everything. You continue drifting forward, but there's something different now. The air feels ancient. Not old like Grandma's kitchen, but old, like deep mountain lava old. And the chinampas? They've changed too. Less agricultural, more symbolic. Like nature's turned into a stage, and something unseen is preparing to take center. You've entered the ritual gardens, chinampas designed not for crops, but for meaning. The first one you pass doesn't grow maize or squash. It's blanketed in flowers, marigolds, morning glories, cempasúchil, and white lilies all woven together in stunning spirals. Their colors are so bright, it's like someone turned up the saturation on reality. They weren't just pretty, they were offerings. These flowers were gathered daily, floated across the canals, and presented to gods at temples, or burned in sacred fires. The Aztecs believed flowers were the language of the divine. Every petal a syllable, every bouquet a prayer. You bend closer, inhale the scent, and there's something there. Not perfume, memory. The kind that catches you just behind the ribs. Near that floral altar is a much smaller, low-laying chinampa, barely a few feet across. At first you think it's decorative. Then you notice it's surrounded by children. Some are placing tiny birds on the soft soil. Others are arranging white feathers in neat patterns. One is crying but softly, like he knows this is important. This is a child's remembrance garden, a sacred space for young ones who passed too soon. Families came here to honor them with rituals involving hummingbirds, which the Aztecs believed carried the spirits of fallen warriors and children alike. According to Nahua cosmology, these souls became stars or followed the sun through the sky. This little floating island, it's not a grave, it's a gateway. You float on, quiet now. Historians still argue how formal these chinampas were. Some believe they were private affairs, while others think they were state-maintained temples on water, extensions of land-based rituals. But even without scholarly consensus, one thing is obvious. These places mattered. They weren't margins, they were sacred main events. Suddenly the air thickens with the smell of copal. You spot a priest standing waist-deep in the canal, robes soaked, arms outstretched. In the middle of his chinampa is a small stone altar, partially sunken. He's chanting, not loudly, not theatrically, just steadily, like a tide. He sprinkles amaranth seeds in a circle around the altar. A few land in the water and float away, and that's fine. Nothing here is rigid. It's more atmospheric than precise. This ritual is for Tlaloc, the rain god. And the altar? It's half submerged on purpose. This chinampa is a tide calendar marking seasonal lake levels. When the water hits certain carved lines in the stone, the priest knows when to plant and when to pray. You're not sure what stuns you more, the practicality or the poetry. Not far from him, another priestess walks barefoot across a chinampa with stone glyphs embedded directly into the soil. You notice a few maze, water, serpent, eagle. She's placing feathers on each in what looks like a specific order. This is glyph gardening, a fusion of language and landscape. The garden doesn't just grow, it tells a story. And here's a weird little gem. Some chinampas were once used as theaters. Yep, drama on water. Actors performed sacred plays while floating audiences watched from canoes. One record describes a performance where the lead actor played a maze spirit who drowned and resurrected, surrounded by dancers dressed as frogs. Critics of the day? Probably canoes full of noble teens whispering, "Ugh, he forgot his frog leap." You smile. Theater kids, 1420 style. You pass another chinampa, this one meticulously swept. No plants, no altar. Just ash. Thick, dark, and undisturbed. A sacrifice site, but not human. You see feathers, bits of cactus, fragments of obsidian knives. This was likely a place for symbolic sacrifice, burning things of value to make metaphorical offerings. A kind of exchange with the gods. But your quirky tidbit? Occasionally Aztec autumn nobles sacrificed chocolate. Melted cacao was poured into the canals as tribute, especially during festivals for Xochiquetzal, goddess of beauty and fertility. Historians argue whether it was truly rare or just a flex, but either way, pouring chocolate into the lake is a whole new level of rich kid energy. And then silence. No priests, no flowers, just a single floating island made entirely of obsidian dust and river stones. You instinctively paddle slower. This is a memory chinampa, a place where families or guilds preserved relics, bones, tools, keepsakes, buried in underwater jars beneath the soil. Like an Aztec time capsule. No temples, no fanfare, just preservation. The stars above shimmer, their reflections dancing across the canal like curious eels. You find yourself whispering, though no one's around. This place demands respect, and you're more than willing to give it. The final ritual garden you pass is a circle. Perfect, geometric, intentional. At the center stands a ceiba tree believed by many Mesoamerican cultures to be the axis mundi, the world tree connecting sky, earth, and underworld. Its roots reach deep into the chinampa. Its branches stretch like arms in prayer. You feel something here. Not magic, not religion, just scale. Like for a moment, you understand the entire vertical shape of existence. And then the breeze shifts and it's gone. You breathe out, not realizing you were holding your breath. And somewhere behind you, a priest quietly begins to sing. No instruments, just voice. Old Nahuatl words, steady and slow, carried over still water like a lullaby no one remembered they needed. You don't understand the lyrics, but you get the meaning. This floating world was never just soil and crops. It was memory, offering, and sometimes, if you were lucky, a moment of peace. You continue drifting in a hush now, deeper into the forgotten fringe of the lake. The chinampas are fewer here, and the ones still floating seem older. Warped at the edges, overgrown with vines and wildflowers, their orderly rows lost to time. A willow's branches trail in the water like sleepy fingers, and your canoe brushes through them as though entering a dream no one finished. You've reached the abandoned gardens, the last quiet corners where the Aztec world lingered after the empire had fallen. The wind shifts, not strong, just enough to carry the scent of damp wood and distant fire. You can almost hear the sigh of the earth itself, like it's telling you. It didn't end here, it just changed. Some of these chinampas were left behind after the Spanish conquest, when entire neighborhoods were wiped out or forcibly moved. The canals narrowed with neglect, crops shriveled, and yet patches of green kept sprouting through the cracks. Wild maize. rogue squash vines. Medicinal herbs creeping back they'd never left. There's something kind of beautiful about that. Even in abandonment, the land insists on life. You float by one chinampa so covered in moss and ferns it looks like a raft built by forest spirits. A broken clay cup peeks out from the mud, half swallowed by time. You imagine someone once knelt there, planting, praying, pouring chocolate into the soil, and now it's just you. A visitor from the future wondering how something so full could ever go silent. Historians still argue whether these neglected gardens were intentionally preserved as sacred memory sites or simply left to fade with time. Some records suggest former Chinampa farmers kept sneaking back at night, tending to their plots in secret like rebels with watering cans. Others say they let them go, unable to bear watching them rot under someone else's rule. There's no clear answer, just ghosts in the lilies. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few post-conquest chinampas were actually repurposed by Spanish settlers into floating taverns. Yes, floating bars, complete with pulque jugs and mariachi precursors. One friar famously described them as dens of vice atop waterlogged sin. You kind of wish you could have seen one. History, but with a tipsy soundtrack. Another old chinampa looms ahead. This one looks oddly pristine. A little too tidy. And then you realize someone's still using it. Not for crops, not for offerings, for records. Laid out on its surface are dozens of ceramic shards, each painted with glyphs. Names, seasons, crops. It's a floating archive, a chinampa-turned library. Some glyphs are faded, others freshly carved. This isn't a ruin, it's a ledger. Generations of quiet caretakers, passing down knowledge without needing books. Just sun, clay, and a long memory. A young man sits cross-legged at its edge, writing carefully with a brush made from bird feathers. You make eye contact for just a second. He nods. You nod back. That's enough. Past him, the canal curves gently, leading you to the very edge of the floating city. You thought this would feel like an ending, but it doesn't. It feels suspended, like a breath held mid-sentence. And then something you didn't expect. A small new chinampa just forming. Still bare. Just reeds, a layer of mud, and a scattering of sunflower seeds. No plants yet, no story. Just potential. Like the city itself is testing the idea of revival. You lean over your canoe and dip a hand into the water. It's cool still and impossibly deep. This whole floating world built by hands, dreams, prayers, and experiments was never really about permanence. It was about balance. Between water and land, faith and science, ritual and routine. You realize the Aztecs weren't trying to dominate nature. They were dancing with it. And so, in this final stretch of your journey, you begin to let go. Not of the memory, but of the need to understand everything. Some places aren't puzzles, they're lullabies. And this one is humming softly around you. The water beneath your canoe grows even stiller now, like it's holding its breath along with you. Above, the stars seem softer, less like pinpricks and more like distant lanterns floating in ink. You've drifted far beyond the noise, the conquest, the questions. Now it's just you, the chinampas, and the hush of a world that once thrived in rhythm with lake and moonlight. Each island you passed carried a story. Some loud, some whispered. All of them rooted in the same truth. That life, when lived in harmony with nature, doesn't disappear. It echoes, it resprouts, it floats. The canoe barely moves now. Even your breathing has slowed. You're not really in a historical journey anymore. You're in a soft green memory stitched together by flowers, songs, and quiet rituals. You imagine lying down on a chinampa, on a bed of sweet basil and warm soil, feeling it sway slightly beneath you as crickets begin to chirp. No need to get up. No need to solve anything. Just rest. Let the gentle water rock your thoughts into stillness. Let the scent of marigolds and moss dissolve the last busy edges of your day. Let the night take over. No alarms here. no deadlines. Just the whisper of reeds and the soft splash of time. The floating gardens are still here. Somewhere. Maybe not in maps, but in memory. In myth. In you. So sleep now, gentle voyager. You've seen enough. The lake will hold your dreams,